Loneliness is the price of the freedom I do not wish to give up. Carl Jung. When we speak about solitude, most people imagine it as a state of emptiness, of being cut off, or even of suffering. In a world that celebrates connection, speed, and constant communication, to be alone often feels like a punishment. Yet, when we observe the path of every warrior, every thinker, and every individual who has walked their own way, we discover something very different. Solitude is not a punishment, but a doorway. It is the doorway to yourself. The warrior knows that before facing the world, he must first face himself. And to face oneself, there must be silence, there must be space, there must be solitude. Because in the noise of the crowd, in the endless stream of opinions, and in the constant pull of distractions, you cannot hear the whisper of your own soul. Think for a moment about how life feels today. Most of us are never truly alone. Even when we are sitting in our rooms, our minds are crowded with voices from social media, news, and entertainment. In the morning, the first thing many people do is not breathe deeply or reflect, but reach for their phones. In the evening, the last thing they see before closing their eyes is a glowing screen filled with other people's lives. But here lies the paradox. When you fill yourself constantly with noise, you lose touch with your own path. And so, the warriors. Solitude is not about escaping the world forever, but about retreating long enough to see it clearly, to understand it, and to return to it with purpose. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone in New York City or London. Life is fast, always moving, always noisy. There are crowds, deadlines, and social obligations. People are constantly rushing to catch the train, meet someone for coffee, or attend the next event. But, even in such cities, people who take just 1 hour a day to walk alone in a park, to sit quietly in their home without devices, often describe how they feel a deep reset within themselves. They reconnect to something they didn't even realize they had lost. That is the beginning of solitude as a practice, not isolation, but intention. The warrior's solitude does not mean withdrawing from loved ones, nor abandoning responsibilities. Instead, it is the act of pausing, of stepping back, of walking alone, so that when you do walk with others, you know why you are walking and where you are going. History is full of examples of this. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., who walked alone in his conviction before he ever led crowds in his movement. Think of Steve Jobs, who would take long solitary walks to spark clarity and creativity. Or think of Maya Angelou, who would rent a hotel room by herself with nothing but a notepad to write some of her most powerful words. All of them understood that the strength to influence others comes first from the strength to sit alone, to listen inwardly, to face the self without escape. But why is it so difficult for most of us to embrace solitude? It is because solitude is like a mirror. When you are alone, the mirror is clear. It shows you everything, your fears, your weaknesses, your doubts. And this is uncomfortable, so we run away from it. We fill our lives with distractions because facing our inner selves is harder than facing the world. But the warrior accepts this mirror. He understands that by walking alone, by entering solitude, he is not escaping life, he is entering it more deeply. He trains himself not to be afraid of silence, because silence is the birthplace of clarity. Think of an athlete in the UK training for a marathon. While the crowd cheers on race day, the truth is that the real preparation happens alone, during those long, early morning runs, when the streets are empty, when the cold wind bites, and when no one is watching. That is solitude in action. No applause, no recognition, just you and your path. And it is in those moments, alone, that strength is built. Now imagine a young professional in the United States, maybe working in finance, technology, or education, surrounded by constant meetings, messages, and pressure to perform. This person feels drained and uncertain about their direction. They decide to spend their weekends hiking alone in nature, leaving their phone behind. At first it feels uncomfortable. The silence is too loud. But after several weeks, something shifts. Ideas begin to flow, priorities become clearer, and the weight of confusion begins to lift. This is the warrior's solitude revealing itself, clarity born from silence. You see, solitude is not about being lonely. Loneliness is the absence of connection. Solitude is the presence of self. When you walk alone, you discover your own rhythm. You learn to stand without leaning on the opinions of others, and slowly, you build the courage to follow a path that is truly yours, not one that society has simply placed in front of you. But solitude must be chosen consciously. It is not enough to be alone physically while your mind is still entangled in noise. True solitude is when the external world quiets down and the internal world awakens. One way to practice this is to create small rituals of solitude in daily life. For example, instead of listening to music or podcasts on your morning commute, spend 10 minutes in silence. Instead of scrolling through your phone during lunch, take your meal outside, breathe, and simply observe. Small acts like these reconnect you to yourself. They remind you that beneath the layers of pressure and performance, there is stillness waiting to be found. And so, the warrior begins to realize solitude is not weakness, it is strength. It is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is not escape, it is return. The path of solitude is demanding, yes. But every path of mastery demands that at some point, you walk alone. Because when you walk alone, you learn to listen. And when you learn to listen, you finally begin to hear the call of your true path. Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Jean-Paul Sartre, freedom sounds like a gift, but when you truly understand it, you see it as also a burden. Because freedom means responsibility, and responsibility means making choices. To choose your own path, you cannot always walk with the crowd. Sometimes, you must walk alone. When a warrior chooses solitude, he is not rejecting the world. He is accepting responsibility for his own life. He stops waiting for someone else to define his direction, and he begins to carve it himself. But here is the challenge. Walking alone can feel frightening. Imagine a young person in the United States finishing college. Their friends might go into corporate jobs. Some might travel, others may return home. But deep inside, this person feels called to build something different. Maybe a business, maybe a creative pursuit, maybe even to take a year to volunteer and explore. The weight of other people's expectations begins to push against them. Are you sure this is the right path? What if you fail? These are the voices of society. And so, if they are not strong, they will bend to the path laid out by others. But the warrior knows there is no growth in only following. Growth happens when you step away, when you take the road that others may not understand. Let's take a familiar example for many in the UK. J.K. Rowling, before Harry Potter became a global phenomenon, she spent years writing alone, often in cafes, with no guarantee that anyone would ever read her work. She had no crowd cheering her on, no certainty of success. She only had solitude, the silence of her own effort, her own belief. Without that solitude, without walking alone, those stories would have remained unwritten. This is the essence of the warrior's solitude, to embrace the uncertainty of being on your own path, knowing that no one else can walk it for you. But solitude also teaches another truth. When you walk alone, you discover your strength is not dependent on approval. In the US and UK today, we live in cultures of constant validation. Social media thrives on likes, comments, and followers. But what happens when the likes are gone? Does your value disappear too? The warrior cannot live that way. The warrior must learn to be enough without applause. And solitude is the training ground for this lesson. Think about a musician practicing in their bedroom, long before they ever play in front of a crowd. Those hours are invisible to the world. No claps, no recognition, just repetition. It is lonely, but it is necessary. The stage is won in the quiet hours of solitude. Or imagine a man in London who has just gone through a painful breakup. Friends invite him out to drink, to distract, to forget. But instead, he chooses to spend time alone, to reflect, to understand what went wrong and how he can grow. At first it feels like a wound, but in that solitude, he gains insight into himself. He emerges not bitter, not broken, but wiser and stronger. Without solitude, the pain would have only been numbed. With solitude, it was transformed. Here is another lesson solitude teaches. Not everyone can walk with you, and that is okay. In life, many people will come and go, friends, colleagues, even family members. Sometimes you will outgrow people, and sometimes they will outgrow you. If you fear solitude, you will cling to relationships that no longer serve your growth. But if you embrace solitude, you will understand that letting go is not loss, but space for new connections, deeper bonds, and truer companions. To appear. Think of the soldier who trains apart from his family. The separation is painful, but it forges resilience. Think of the student who leaves home to study abroad, feeling lonely at first, but eventually discovering independence. These experiences remind us that solitude is not forever, but it is necessary. There is a saying, if you want to go fast, go with the crowd. If you want to go far, walk alone. The warrior's path is not about quick victories. It is about depth, endurance, and purpose. But let us also be clear, solitude is not isolation. Isolation is when you close the door to the world out of fear or anger. Solitude is when you open the door inward to meet yourself, so that when you return to the world, you bring more clarity, more strength, more authenticity. This is important for those living in busy Western societies. Many in the US and UK struggle with burnout. They work long hours, chase constant achievement, and try to meet endless expectations. Yet, they rarely stop. They rarely step away. They rarely create solitude. And so, they lose themselves in the process. The warrior does differently. The warrior pauses. He steps back. He creates solitude, not as escape, but as practice. Just as a fighter retreats to train before stepping into the ring, so too must we retreat to solitude before stepping back into the noise of life. Let me give you a practical image. Imagine standing at the center of Times Square in New York, or Piccadilly Circus in London. The lights are flashing, the crowds are rushing, the noise is overwhelming. That is the modern world. Now imagine stepping into a quiet room nearby, closing the door, and sitting in silence for 10 minutes. The contrast is striking. That silence doesn't mean the world has disappeared. It means you have created space to breathe, to reset, to return with clarity. That is what solitude does for the mind. In solitude, you learn patience, you learn discipline, you learn to guide yourself instead of waiting for someone else to guide you. And perhaps most importantly, you learn to befriend yourself. Because how can you expect to walk strongly in the world if you cannot even stand with yourself in silence? Many people today fear being alone because they have never learned how to sit with themselves. Their own thoughts feel like enemies. But the warrior reverses this. Through solitude, he makes his mind an ally. He learns that silence is not emptiness, but presence. He learns that walking alone is not abandonment, but empowerment. So, remember this. Solitude is the forge. In the fire of being alone, you burn away what is false, and you are left with what is true. The warrior enters solitude, not to escape life, but to prepare for it. And when he returns, he is no longer easily swayed by the crowd, no longer chained to validation, no longer fearful of loss. He has discovered that the path is his to walk, and even if he must walk alone, he is never truly lonely. Because he carries within him the strongest companion, himself. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Steve Jobs. These words remind us of a truth most people prefer to avoid. Life is short, and the path we walk cannot belong to someone else. Yet, if we look around, we see many lives built on borrowed expectations, careers chosen because they seemed safe, relationships pursued because they seemed acceptable, lifestyles adopted because they seemed normal. But normal is not the same as authentic, and safety is not the same as fulfillment. The warrior understands this. That is why he chooses solitude. Because only when you step away from the crowd do you realize how much of your life has been shaped by voices that are not yours. Only in the silence of solitude can you hear your own. Let's imagine an example. A young woman in Los Angeles is working in marketing. She is successful by most standards. Good salary, trendy lifestyle, busy social circle. But every evening, when she comes home, there is a quiet dissatisfaction that no amount of parties or shopping can fill. She remembers how much she once loved painting, but she has abandoned it for years. One weekend, she decides to spend her time not at gatherings, but in solitude. She sets up a canvas, puts her phone away, and simply paints. Hours pass, and she feels alive again. This small act of solitude awakens her truth. She does not need to live for appearances. She must live for what gives her soul breath. The crowd rarely gives you permission to follow such paths. The crowd will tell you to stay busy, stay practical, stay safe. But the warrior's solitude teaches you to stop waiting for permission. You must give it to yourself. In the UK, there are countless stories of individuals who have left traditional careers to follow something deeply personal. Some have left office jobs to open small bakeries, to work with wildlife, or to start community projects. From the outside, these choices may look like stepping down, but from within, they are steps. Up into authenticity, up into alignment, up into the life that feels like their own. And every one of these transformations began with solitude, a moment of walking away from noise to hear the quiet voice within. But solitude is not only about discovering passions, it is also about confronting weaknesses. Because solitude, as we said earlier, is like a mirror. And mirrors do not only show what is beautiful, they show everything. Take for example, a man in Chicago. He spends much of his time socializing, drinking with friends, avoiding silence. Deep down, he knows he has unresolved anger from his past, but he buries it under noise. One day, after a health scare, he decides to sit with himself. No phone, no distractions, just a notebook and his thoughts. At first, it is unbearable. Old memories surface, pain he has hidden resurfaces, but instead of running, he writes, he reflects, he allows himself to feel. Slowly, the weight begins to lift. That is solitude's gift. It does not only reveal who you are, it heals who you are. This is something we must understand clearly. Solitude is not comfortable. Growth rarely is. But in the discomfort, there is transformation. Think of physical training. An athlete lifting weights does not become stronger in comfort. He becomes stronger in resistance. A runner does not build endurance by strolling casually. She builds it when her lungs burn, when her legs ache. In the same way, solitude strengthens the mind, not by soothing it, but by challenging it. By forcing you to sit with your truth, it stretches your capacity for honesty, resilience, and clarity. Another example, consider meditation. For many in the US and UK, meditation has become popular. But if you ask those who practice it seriously, they will tell you the first sessions are often difficult. The mind resists. Thoughts become louder. Restlessness grows, yet, if they persist, something changes. The storm calms, clarity arises, peace begins to settle. This is solitude in its purest form, the discipline of sitting with yourself until the noise loses its power. The warrior embraces this discipline because he knows that in solitude, he learns self-mastery, and self-mastery is the foundation of freedom. But here is another paradox. When you master solitude, you actually deepen your relationships with others. How? Because you are no longer dependent. You no longer cling to people out of fear of being alone. Instead, you choose them out of strength, out of authenticity, out of genuine connection. Think of a friendship or a relationship where one person is afraid of being alone. Their fear drives neediness, control, or dependence. Such bonds are fragile. Now think of a person who is comfortable with solitude. They do not need constant reassurance. They do not need someone to complete them, because they are already whole. Their presence is lighter, freer, more genuine. They can give without demanding, love without clinging, and walk beside others without losing their own path. This is the warrior's way. By walking alone, he learns how to walk better with others. Let us ground this with a simple story. A woman in Manchester goes through a period of solitude after losing her job. Instead of rushing immediately into the next position, she takes time to reflect, to journal, to walk in nature. Through this, she gains a clearer sense of what she truly wants. Later, when she joins a new company, she carries a different presence. Her conversations are more confident, her choices more deliberate, her interactions more balanced. Her solitude has not made her distant, it has made her stronger in connection. And so, we begin to see solitude not as separation, but as preparation. The warrior prepares himself in silence so that when he steps into the world, his voice carries weight, his actions carry clarity, his presence carries authenticity. But perhaps, the most powerful lesson of solitude is this. It teaches you that you are enough. In a culture that constantly tells us we need more success, more possessions, more validation, solitude whispers the opposite. It says, you are already whole. When you walk alone, when you sit in silence, when you strip away the noise, you begin to feel it. You realize you do not need constant approval to be valuable. You do not need endless possessions to be fulfilled. You do not need to perform for the crowd to be worthy. You are enough, as you are, right now. This realization is rare, but it is freedom. And once you taste this freedom, you no longer live as a prisoner to the expectations of others. You begin to live as a warrior, guided not by fear, not by pressure, but by truth. So, the warrior's solitude is not about rejecting the world. It is about returning to it more whole. It is not about denying relationships. It is about deepening them. It is not about escaping reality. It is about seeing it more clearly. When you walk alone, you are not lost. You are finding your way. And, when you return, you carry something the world desperately needs. A self that is awake, aligned, and unafraid. It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. Sir Edmund Hillary. The warrior's solitude is not about escaping mountains or escaping struggles. It is about facing them with clarity. And the greatest mountain is not outside of us, it is inside. When you walk alone, you are not running from life. You are walking into the heart of it. You are stepping onto the path where excuses no longer hide you, where distractions no longer protect you, where you must meet yourself as you truly are. And this is the path of courage. Most people avoid it. They cling to the comfort of noise, to the security of the crowd. They are afraid of solitude because it demands truth. But the warrior does not avoid truth. He seeks it, even if the truth is uncomfortable, even if it is painful. He knows it is better than living a lie. Consider someone in New York working in a corporate environment. For years, they tell themselves that the long hours, the high salary, the constant rush are worth it. But every time they are alone, a voice inside whispers, "This is not who you are." They drown that voice with entertainment, with distractions, with endless busyness. But one day, they decide to stop. They take a weekend, away, no phone, no television, just silence. And in that silence, the voice becomes louder. For the first time, they listen. That moment, though frightening, is the beginning of their freedom. The warrior's solitude is full of such moments. The moments when you finally stop lying to yourself. When you finally stop pretending. when you finally have the courage to see who you really are. And once you see clearly, you cannot go back. Think of Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Mount Everest, whose words opened this reflection. Before he climbed the mountain, he conquered himself, his doubts, his fears, his limitations. Solitude was part of his preparation, because no one else could carry his inner burdens. The climb outward always begins with the climb inward. In the UK, many soldiers who have served in difficult conditions will tell you that some of the hardest battles they fought were not on the battlefield, but in the solitude of their own minds, facing uncertainty, fear, and loss. And yet, those who emerged stronger often say that solitude became their teacher. They discovered reserves of courage they did not know they had. This is why the warrior values solitude, because it shows you your strength. It shows you your weakness. It shows you the path that is truly yours. But solitude also reveals something deeper. It shows you that you are connected to everything. This sounds like a paradox. How can being alone make you feel connected? Yet it is true. Think of sitting quietly by the ocean in California, watching the waves. At first, you feel separate, as though you are just one person looking at the vastness of nature. But as you breathe, as you sit longer, you begin to feel part of it. The rhythm of the waves matches the rhythm of your breath. The silence of the sky mirrors the silence within. Suddenly, you are not separate. You are connected. That is the hidden gift of solitude. It strips away the noise, so you can remember your place in the whole. A man walking alone in the Scottish Highlands, a woman sitting in Central Park at dawn, a student resting under an oak tree on a quiet campus in Texas. In these moments of solitude, the separation dissolves. What remains is unity, a feeling of belonging that no crowd can give, because it arises not from outside approval, but from inner alignment. The warrior's solitude, then, is not loneliness. It is belonging of the highest order, belonging to yourself, belonging to the moment, belonging to life itself. And when you learn this, you are no longer afraid of being alone. You no longer cling desperately to people, possessions, or recognition. You can walk with others freely, because you are not using them to fill your emptiness. You can give more, because you are no longer giving from lack. You can love more deeply, because you are no longer loving from fear. This is why solitude is not the end of the path. It is the beginning of a new way of walking it. Let us bring this closer to the daily lives of people in the US and UK. Imagine a young professional in Boston who spends every evening at social events, chasing connection but feeling drained. One day, they choose to stay home alone, not as avoidance, but as a choice. They cook for themselves, read, reflect, and sleep early. The next day, they feel lighter, clearer, more alive. Or imagine a retiree in the UK whose children have grown and moved away. At first, the silence of the house feels unbearable, but instead of filling it with constant television, she chooses to garden, to write letters, to walk by the river. Slowly, the solitude turns from emptiness into richness. She discovers joy in her own company. These are not small shifts. They are transformations. And transformation is the essence of the warrior's solitude. Because in solitude, you shed the masks you wear for the world. You take off the armor of pretense, of performance, of expectation. You see yourself raw, unpolished, unprotected. And in that vulnerable honesty, you begin to rebuild stronger, clearer, freer. The warrior is not afraid of this. He knows that solitude is the training ground of authenticity. So, as we conclude, let us remember, solitude is not a prison. It is a sanctuary. It is the place where you step away from the noise of the world so you can hear the truth of your own heart. It is the path where you stop being a copy and start becoming yourself. The world will always try to pull you into its current. It will always try to tell you what you should do, who you should be, how you should live. But if you never step away, if you never walk alone, you will drown in those voices. Solitude is your chance to rise above them, to breathe, to choose. Do not be afraid of it. Welcome it. Even if it feels uncomfortable at first, trust that it will shape you. Take a walk alone. Sit quietly without your phone. Write down your thoughts. Reflect. Listen. This is not wasted time. It is sacred time, because in the silence of solitude, you will hear the call of your path. And when you hear it, you must follow it, even if no one else understands. Even if no one else walks with you. For this is the warrior's way, to walk alone, so that when you return to the world, you do not walk blindly, but with purpose. And remember this, a warrior walking alone is never truly alone, because he carries within him the strength of his own soul, the guidance of his own truth, and the presence of life itself. So walk alone, walk bravely, walk with solitude as your companion, and you will discover that the path you feared is not empty at all. It is full of everything you were always seeking.